way to start off our day 3, and we are so happy because we have Mike. He's the writer, director, producer. He did makeup, he did some of the sound, and he came all the way from Peru, and he's here with us. So Mike, come on up here. I love to meet our filmmakers, you know, because you watch their film and you're like, man, this person, he's got a crazy mind, you know, and then we meet you and you're just like super nice and
Sure, yeah, I'm super nice.
super nice, super nice.
Okay.
So I'm gonna give you this, even
Okay.
though you probably don't need it, but tell everybody who you are and where you're
Absolutely.
from.
First off, I want to say thank you to Matt and Sue for putting on such a great show. We've enjoyed the last 3 days. I think Rusty will agree. And have you guys gotten? We sent some free DVDs. I don't know if you guys.
Well, we
all
have
gotten
more,
these.
don't we, that we're gonna put on that
Yeah.
table over there, and so
I just want to say quickly,
Sure.
yeah, make sure you guys get these. Rusty was the actor in 2 of the segments of this, and he'd be happy to sign it for you as well.
Yes.
They're free. So
Yes.
make sure you pick up one.
we'll make sure we have a nice stack over
Perfect.
there, and of course, like you just said, we all want your autographs. So,
Oh,
and I brought a
he's the
silver
man.
Sharpie
Rusty
today,
is the man.
silver Sharpie,
Silver
because it goes
Sharpie.
great with the cover, as I think it was Rusty told us yesterday. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let me explain how this film came to be. I currently live in Peru. I've been there for about 2.5 years. And I really, like, for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been obsessed with pre-code horror comics. These were comic books that pretty much saw their heyday between 1950 and 1954. In 1955, the Comics Code Authority kicked in, and those comic books went away. All of the people, the artists, the publishers, they all lost their jobs. So it was a huge First Amendment loss. The biggest, I would say, up to that date, historically speaking, for freedom of speech in the United States, okay? And the problem with the pre-code horror comics and their availability today is the fact that they were banned and burned in such great quantities by the millions that very few exist today. Luckily, people are reprinting these comic books, so you can get them. They're readily available. The 3 stories you just saw are from those pre-code comic books, not EC Comics, but other publishers, lesser known publishers. And 2 of the stories, there's an argument as to one of them, but at least one of the stories was written by one of the only 3 women who worked in pre-code horror comic books at the time, Ruth Roach, who wrote Experiment in Terror. She probably also wrote Bon Appetit, which was the last one with Chef Francois. So that was a really interesting discovery that I made. But so the weird thing is that, of course, I'm living in Peru. I'm obsessed with these comic books. And I thought, man, you know, I should make an anthology based upon some of these great stories because they're so weird. You know, I just love the stories, the art, and everything. And so basically what happened is that there was a festival, kind of like a film festival horror convention in Lima, Peru, called Horror Fest Lima, like 2 years ago. And so they invited me as a guest, and they gave me a table, and I proceeded to do a casting call for actors and actresses in Lima who were bilingual, because what you've just seen is the Spanish version. I'm currently editing the English version. There are 2 versions of this film. We shot simultaneously in Spanish and English languages. So you know, it's still a kind of a process, a very long process. We're going, you know, it's as fast as we can. But So I did the casting. I found the pretty much 90% of the people that you just saw acting in this film. We hired the witch, the actress who plays the witch, Mayela Yokia, is actually a famous actress in Peru. She does a lot of theater, she does some TV. She did just a kick-ass job as the witch. I just loved her character. Yes, I just really loved it. And that's pretty much it. We ended up shooting this film about American 50s pre-code horror comics in Peru. So there you go. It's just kind of this weird process that happened. And you know, the one thing that I probably wouldn't do, the entire budget for this film was $9,000, okay? And I probably, in hindsight, I probably wouldn't have shot in both languages, because essentially what happened is it doubled our set time, practically, okay? Because we had to shoot a scene in Spanish, then turn around and shoot it in English. Everybody had to adjust, the actors had to adjust for shooting it in English. Sometimes it was kind of a nightmare, okay? And especially for a no-budget film, it was rather difficult. So that was the only thing that I think I probably would have just shot it in Spanish and spent more time on the Spanish language production of it. But we've got two versions, so with the idea being that marketing the film would be easier to have an English and a Spanish version. So that's how that is.
Very nice, well explained. You
Thank you.
you took care of like 7 of my questions I had. Now I'm like,
Okay.
So aside from the pre-code horror, what
Yes.
other things have been your influence throughout your life?
Well, certainly in horror, I would say growing up watching 50s, 50s and 60s B-movie science fiction films. I love Roger Corman. The last film I made was a horror comedy. It's called First Man on Mars. And it's on, anybody out there watch stuff on Tubi TV? Tubi, T-U-B-I? No? So, a few people. All right, good. It's on there. First Man on Mars. It's a satire of like 70s drive-in science fiction schlock kind of stuff. Kind of more like an homage to The Incredible Melting Man, stuff like that. Okay. So I love horror comedies, and I love the old Roger Corman horror comedies of the 50s and 60s. I just love those films. But as far as like, what would be considered serious horror films, I would go way back to, I love some silent horror films, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, that type of stuff. I love Metropolis, which is actually science fiction, Fritz Lang. But probably one of my favorite films, horror films of all time, I think that I drew a lot of inspiration from, as far as cinematography, lighting, shadows, and so forth, was Island of Lost Souls. This is about 1931. This was the first adaptation of H.G. Wells' novel, Island of Dr. Moreau. And I think by far the best adaptation. In black and white, incredible lighting in that film, and the makeup effects were fantastic. Very grim science fiction horror film. And that one really stuck with me. Certainly some of the Tales from the Crypt series, I love that stuff. And Creep Show, the original Creep Show, certainly was a big inspiration. But there was just a lot of like going through into the 70s and 80s, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, stuff like that I love. Return of the Living Dead, one of my favorite films. So it's a wide variety of things that inspire me. As far as writers go, Philip K. Dick, Harlan Ellison, Edgar Allan Poe, H.P. Lovecraft, those would probably be my tops, and terms of writers.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah, so you definitely like the old school.
Absolutely.
And
I totally go.
like
old
your
school.
background, because a lot of people, they go to school and study, and that's how they get into filmmaking. Was it like that for you, or were you just passionate about filming your whole life and kind of taught yourself through your experience?
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. I just watched films and started making them. You know,
Nice.
basically. Wait. I started making Super 8 films when I was a kid. You know, just goofing off. And you know, eventually it just became one of those things where, you know, shooting a couple of short films and then wanting to make a feature film. And that was it. I just found other people that wanted to do the same thing. And so we collaborated on a couple of features in New Orleans. And one of them, I'm still trying, I talked to Rusty today about this. It's a film called Zombie versus Marty Gras. And it's kind of like it's black and white. We shot it on black and white Super 8 film. And it's a horror comedy, but it's kind of like a combination of Roger Corman and Jean-Luc Godard. So it's kind of like schlock B-movies meets French New Wave cinema of the 60s. So it's just insane. Unfortunately, the film is not in distribution now. It was with SRS, Sub Rosa Studios, for several years. And it's just, I don't know, the other guys that I made it with, they haven't done anything with the film, and they're kind of in charge of the distribution of it. So I kind of have to, I don't know, you know, we'll have to see what we can do, but it's pretty funny and weird, and I would recommend that one. You know, I love black and white. I love shooting in black and white. And this film, we shot the witch scenes also in Super 16 film. The problem was that I had transported a lot of film stock down to Lima, and this film stock was already like 4 or 5 years old. It had been frozen. When I sent it down there, it got unfrozen. Then I refroze it in Lima, and this film stock it was no good. So there's only one scene with the witch, which is entirely in Super 16. The rest of it is digital, shot with my Canon 5D. So there you go. A little film survived. You know, because First Man on Mars, we shot entirely on Super 16. I just love the look of film. There's something about it that is just different. You know, it has I don't know, if you love 70s and 80s horror B films, there's a certain look that when they're shot on film that just makes it more authentic for me, you know. I have nothing against digital video, but if you ever get the chance to shoot on film, do it, because it's just, there's a lot more latitude to work with. You can do all kinds of stuff. You can play with it in post and just do a bunch of stuff with it that the video has a certain limit, you know. So that's kind of the thing about that.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, for sure. So out of all of your many talents, directing and writing and cinematographer, makeup, and the soundtrack and the sound design, I thought with this film was awesome, was spot on.
Oh, thank you.
Which is your favorite thing to do?
Well, let me say a couple of things. The makeup effects, which I loved in this film, there aren't a ton, but when they happen, they're really good. The lead makeup artist on this film is Nanny Stronach's Crimson. Now, she's a Mexican girl who's also living in Lima. She's done movies. She did movies in Mexico. She's in Lima with her husband, so she was the main one. It was kind of like I assisted her. The other people that worked on the makeup, we were like kind of assisting her because I was definitely very busy with the cinematography and we were trying to balance shooting digital with the Super 16 film, so there was a lot to go there, you know, with that. So she took the helm, you know, and so, you know, absolutely, she definitely deserves the majority of the credit for the makeup effects. but I love doing makeup effects. As much as I can do, I do it. You know, First Man on Mars, I did pretty much everything for that. It's just exhausting when you're trying to direct and do all the stuff. But I would say makeup effects and, you know, shooting it with the camera, the cinematography, I love doing that. And I'd say those are the best. And I know the gentleman last night also said something to the effect that his least favorite thing was editing.
Yeah.
The same here.
Yeah.
It's kind of like once you edit the rough cut, that's cool, of course, because you want to see the whole thing and how it lays out. It starts getting really tedious when you start getting into refining the sound, doing Foley, just the mundane stuff that you need to do to, you know, get the sound right. It can be a real, and with this film, since there were two, you know, there's two versions of it, English and Spanish, there are literally two versions. I mean, like, it changes. The sound isn't, like, the background sound is not the same for, you know, one version to the other. So I actually had to re-Foley stuff based upon what worked with the English version and what worked with the Spanish version. It got really, really, really tedious. So, you know, that's kind of, probably would be my least favorite, you know, getting into the nitty gritty of the editing. I know some people love that stuff, but, you know, I kind of love shooting it and the on the set stuff. I love the pre-production. I like writing the scripts. That's really, you know, it's a joy.
Right.
You know,
Yep.
so.
And because you love that part, you almost have to, you can't just hand it to somebody and say, here you go. You just kind of got to be right there, you know,
it's like
just looking over the shoulder. Yeah,
letting somebody else finish their sculpture.
Right.
I don't like it. And so it's like one of those things where even, you know, at the end, it's, you want to be there during the whole process, even though some of it's, you know, just boring. Actually, it's the technical stuff that you're just doing, like somebody walking through leaves. I mean, it's like, yeah, there's absolutely nothing really artistic about that at all. It's just necessary for the sound, you know, and I just don't like that stuff.
I understand. And I'm going to open it up to you guys in a minute, but I did want to know, you came from so far away. Have you ever been to North Carolina or
Absolutely.
Specifically here, the Outer Banks?
No, never been to the Outer Banks. I lived in Winston-Salem for 2 years a while back. And so there you go. But most of my life here, and most of the film, with making the feature films, has been on the Gulf Coast between New Orleans and Mobile, Alabama. Most of the films are pretty much there. We shot one film in Washington State, and Rusty came up for that one. Did a great job. But yeah, it's all been deep south, you know, as far as the filmmaking goes.
I know you probably haven't had too much time to look around, but we have a beach right here, and we have woods and swamps.
You guys have this is an amazing area.
Do you think you ever might film here in the future? You know, if you're doing some scouting out some locations?
Well, I'm moving back here. I'm moving back to the States. I've been in Peru for about 2.5 years, and it's great. It's beautiful. Peru is kind of like California, really. Almost literally. It's got the Pacific coast. It's got the incredible mountains for skiing, just amazing. It also has jungle, which California does not have. But you got the big city, Lima, 10 million people. You got the deserts. It's just got everything in it. So it's fantastic visually. Cusco, Machu Picchu, the ruins, the archaeology. It's just amazing. It has no real film industry. So I brought all of my gear down there, and that's pretty much what I had to use because nobody's selling the stuff that I need. So, you know, fortunately I had stuff. And as far as trying to sell this film, there's no outlet to sell it. There are no local distributors who distribute indie films. They're all distributors who bring in Hollywood films to show at the theaters. That's it. There's nothing else. So I've come to the conclusion at this point that I'm going to move back here probably within the next 6 to 8 months, very soon, somewhere in the South. You know, somewhere between Atlanta and North Carolina. I'm looking. I've already been looking, scouting for rentals and, you know, whatever. So it'll happen soon. And then I can go ahead and market this film and sell, go directly to people, say, look, this is what I got. Go to festivals, present it to agents, whatever. You know, it was something I cannot do down there. It just doesn't happen. So.
Nice. Well, that will be awesome when you do, because, and hopefully you've had a chance to talk to some of the other filmmakers.
Absolutely.
Because I know Richard, he's a technical guy, so maybe you guys could collaborate.
Yeah.
And,
certainly. Yeah,
sure.
it's fantastic. This area is incredibly intriguing. It's like between, you know, Kill Devil Hills, Kitty Hawk, Roanoke Island, Dismal Swamp, all of these areas. I just can't believe the, you know, the different locations that are here. It's
Right.
amazing, you know.
Right.
We're going to, I think tomorrow when we go back to Raleigh, before we go back, we're going to go to Roanoke Island, like take a trail or something in there for an hour or two and check it out, because for us it's like, I mean, the history of
the
this
Lost
area is
Colony.
just,
And,
wow,
yeah.
incredible. Talk about, you know.
And it's weird over there. Like, you go over there and my phone will lose signal.
Cool.
For real,
Cool,
yeah.
you hear that,
And
Rusty?
people, like the people
We're
who do
going.
the
Well,
Lost Colony play,
okay,
like
you'll
they.
know where we were.
I know,
when-
right? I'm worried
when we
about you, though. I'm
disappeared.
also worried about Richard. He's gonna go check out Jockey's Ridge, and after Sandman yesterday, if you guys could just check in, text us like before you
Sure.
leave. We made it.
Sure.
Any of you guys
if
have
we
some
can.
questions for Mike?
Yes.
How were you able to track down the rights to these stories after all these years?
These are all public domain. Yeah, this is the thing. Different from EC Comics, which of course are still in play. The publishers of these comics, we're talking about Stanley Morris and whatever, Ajax Farrell and the like, they're gone. They no longer exist. The rights to these it's all public domain. Nothing was ever renewed. You know, so that was one thing, of course, that compelled me to use these stories, is there were no rights to obtain for them. And I would recommend this to people here that are thinking of making a film or a short film, feature, whatever. Look into one of two things: public domain horror stories. There are thousands. They're great. You don't have any rights to pay for. You can look up online, just look in, do a Google on public domain horror stories. You will get literally hundreds or thousands of stories. With the comic books, it's the same. You just do to back your, to make sure, to double check to make sure that the thing is in public domain, go to the U.S. Copyright Office, do searches on the stories, and so forth, the authors, just to make sure that they're free and clear. And there you go. So that's how this happened with these stories, Yeah. Yes.
The still photos at the very beginning.
Yes.
They looked old. Were they?
They are old. They're from like the turn of the century, turn of the 20th century, between 1900 and 1910. Pretty much. I think all of them are. You can find online archives of like old photos, that have been found and so forth from, probably from the late 19th century into the 20th century, of all kinds of things, Halloween, farming, whatever, so there you go. They were authentically old photos.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I know you said it would be difficult to market the movie in Peru.
Yes.
Did you think about like other Spanish-speaking countries down there that probably have a bigger movie industry, like Mexico or Brazil or something?
Yes. Oh, and that will come into play with the Spanish language version. The problem too is piracy down there. You see, like for instance, in South America, and I can point to Peru and several other countries, they do the same thing. There aren't really video stores to speak of. I mean, there are kiosks and so forth, like you go into a market. All of the films, all the Blu-rays and all the DVDs they sell are pirate. Everything is pirate, okay? So your film will end up there, and you will never see a dime. Okay, so there's another big issue right there. You will get distribution, but you're just not going to see any money from it. So that's another big negative. You know, a distributor, as I said before, the chances of finding a distributor, I mean, Mexico, whatever, and doing something with it, as opposed to finding a distributor in the U.S. that's going to say, wow, you've got 2 versions of this film, Spanish and English, great. We can go ahead and sell it to the Spanish language markets, you know, the Spanish language version, and then just use the English version. And it's all in one thing, you see. I mean, it's just like, there are distributors I know in the U.S. that I probably will go to and talk to them. And they do everything. They do the entire thing. So, you know, there is that. There is a big problem with physical piracy. I don't know how bad it is here.
We have like the real pirates here, like
Yeah,
Blackbeard
you
and
got the Jolly Roger and all
yeah,
that
the
stuff.
Jolly Roger.
Yes. So I hope that answers your question. Okay. Yes.
First of all, I love the H.P. Lovecraft nod in the second story.
Thank you. He got it. Yes, he saw the nod. Actually,
I'm
it's
curious.
in twice. Is it in? It's in
Yes,
it.
the Dr. West. And
Dr. West.
I thought that was great.
Cool.
Did you intend for, and I forget the character's name, I'm sorry,
Dr. Chadwick?
Chadwick, to be part of the greater, like, Lovecraft mythos at this point? If you have
Yes.
anything else with that?
Yes, absolutely, because that guy, the actor, Raul Chamorro, was so good in his role as that son. You know, he just and he is a fan. He's a Lovecraft, you know, fan. He's a horror fan. So he knew what I was going for when he read the script. He's like, oh, yes, the mad scientist, you know. And so we played up the Lovecraft angle, you know, definitely. Had to get it in. In every one of my films, I sneak in like some Lovecraft mention or nod. If you go to Tubi and watch First Man on Mars, you'll get a kick out of it because there's a couple of really cool Lovecraft mentions in there, you know. So glad you caught that though, you know. Yes.
Were there any shots that were directly influenced by the panels, you know, the original comic panels? You know, like an image that you said, okay, that has to translate to the screen.
Yeah. You know, actually, that is a good question because a couple of, for instance, let me give you a for instance with Bon Appetit, the last one with the chef. It was originally, when I read it, it was called Food for Ghouls for some reason, don't know why. But the original pre-code story was called Chef's Delight, and that was like 1951, 1952. And the splash page had this chef who was like a skeleton monster with like knives, like something that never does not happen in the actual story. And it looked really cool, and I was like, well, I can't do anything with that because it's not really in the story. Like much of what they used to do, they would do these splash pages with some action that might not actually even be in the story, just to hype it and sell it. So I think there were a couple of things like some of the scenes where I was referring to the comic. Oh, a good example, Cycle of Horror with the rats eating the legs. That was fun.
Well,
That
I
was
was gonna
hilarious.
ask if that was
Okay.
the actor actually laying there.
No, we made those legs. We had a pair of silicone legs that we molded and used, and then later when the legs start looking really bad, they start rotting. Those were latex legs. And we had real rats. We had this guy who was a rat whisperer. I'm not kidding you. In Lima, this guy he lives with 100 rats in his house. They all live in the house. And he literally can just say something and they will do stuff. It's insane. So we got this guy. He brought 3 rats in to this hotel like this kind of sleazy hotel. Of course, we made it look even worse. And at one point, yes, a rat did escape, and it went out into the lobby for a second. The classic thing that they used in the comic book, which I had to do, was that the panels, like when the thief kills him and he takes his clothes and he puts them on the bed, it's that in the foreground, there's the guy's legs on the bed, and there's the guy in the background leaving through the door. And I was like, this is perfect. You know, every time the guy enters, he sees the same thing. He cannot escape the cycle of horror, right? He just keeps going back to the same room because he's in hell. And I just loved that angle of just the legs and the rats, you know, munching. So that was a big one for that. I would say definitely using that kind of angle that was used in the comic books, you know. So yeah. So what was your reaction when you saw the rats eating the legs? Was it like really? Were you sickened, or I mean, or was it kind of shocking, or? Yeah. I mean, did it work? Did it? I mean.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay.
It does, and I like that angle as well.
Yeah, it was. It worked. It really worked out. The angle did perfectly, because the legs, of course, we only molded up to the knee. So we and then we inserted these sticks into the legs to control them. There's like on the bed. And if we wanted to move them a little this way, whatever. And then we had like chicken that we mixed with just some edible stage blood for the rats to eat. And then just kind of like cut out parts in the legs and put the stuff in there so the rats would, like, you know, dig it out of the flesh there, you know. And at some point, like after a few hours, we got great footage. The close-ups, I just loved those close-ups. But at some point, they'd eaten so much they wanted to go to sleep. So at the end, they're just like laying on the legs sleeping. And I was like, okay, that's it. That's all the footage we get, you know. But fortunately, we got enough footage. I just loved that, though. I love the visual of that. It's not my favorite story. I think the other two stories are stronger as stories. But I just love the rats eating the legs. It's like, you know, in horror, sometimes you want to just if you can get the thing that makes an audience react somehow. And that, I think, it does really kind of get people when they see it. You know, for some reason, we have an aversion to rats eating our legs. So, you know. Are there any other questions? Yes.
One quick one. Is there any reason that you had some backup music in I think it was the third, Christmas theme?
Christmas thing. Yeah. Yes, and that's a really good question, because it's not obvious what's going on. Okay, when they're in the cafe at the beginning, and they're trying to find an apartment, right? And she says, you know, I don't know, Robert. It's just a bad time for looking for an apartment. And there's a Christmas Jingle Bells, I think, is playing in the background. So it's the idea that they're trying to find an apartment during the Christmas season, sometime in December, you know. And so I carry that music. The weird thing about living in Lima is that in December, it's hot as hell. It is the exact opposite of here. There is never any snow. It's like 95 degrees on Christmas Day, and people are throwing water balloons and shit. So it just is a complete, it's kind of like your reality flips. And so you don't, it's not like people are running around, you know, throwing snowballs it just doesn't happen. It never happens. It's you know, it's just not cold there. I think like it maybe gets, I think the lowest temperature I ever experienced in Lima was 45 degrees, and that was cold. Usually, you know, winter's like 50, 60 degrees, somewhere in there, you know, 65. So it was just kind of weird shooting that thing because I was like, God, we can't really show all the Christmas stuff like the, you know, whatever that you would typically see because they don't do it. They really don't do a lot of that. And I hope it comes across. I hope people like kind of put it together that, oh, wait a second, maybe this is during the holiday season. Did it, or what, was that not obvious?
Oh no, we got it for sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
obvious enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, usually it's just we only hear those songs one time during one season of the year, and that's
Yes.
Christmas time. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about putting a Santa cap on Chadwick at one point, but I thought maybe that was too much, you know.
Yeah, the subtle jingle bells and the joy to the world.
Joy to the world.
Yes, that was great.
Yeah,
I thought it was great
loved,
when
yeah,
he's
that was
getting
my
pulled
favorite.
in there.
Right.
Repeat the
Blood.
sounding joy. Oh.
We got dudes with just these massive tubes back and down there, just spurting the blood out. And by the end, well, you can see there's just like we had like 5 gallons of blood on the floor. And it was hitting the ceiling. We didn't even know. It was just going everywhere, and it was hilarious. We're filming it, and we're like, ha ha, you know, it's just absolutely ludicrous. And one thing I tell you, just a quick deal, when his legs are sucked in at the end, he's flailing, and then shoop.
Yeah.
Those are the very legs that were used in the rats. Okay, those are fake. We had a guy down there with the sticks maneuvering the legs like this.
Nice.
And sucked them down in there. And yeah, we were like, hey, let's use the legs over. You know, we already made them. You know, it's low budget.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was great. Awesome. And I think we'll take one more question up there.
Just the reality of shooting in Peru. I know you said there's not very much of a film industry down there,
Yes.
but as far as like film commissions and getting, you know, permission to shoot on city streets and stuff like that, is it difficult to do?
Yeah, it is difficult to do. It's like, well, because there's a couple of things. You know, they like, in order to, everything is rather strict as far as having a business goes. You know, I mean, it's more strict in here. There's just certain things you gotta kind of hoops you gotta leap through and stuff. And so when we shot this film, we tried to avoid as many public areas as possible. And indeed, in the rats thing, there's one scene where he's walking to a park. We shot that quickly, and like 5 minutes later, cops are showing up, and we were out, you know, because in order to get a permit, even to walk in shoot a shot of this guy walking in the park, you just have to go through all this crap. It's unbelievable, really, like what they do. So fortunately, most of the film is like either shot in my house, in the associate producer's house, in one of the producer's houses. We rented legitimately hotels and got location releases from the hotel owners and shot interiors, you know, so legally we were covered in that respect, and we just tried to stay out of exteriors as much as possible because I just going through those hoops, it would have been far more expensive, and it would have delayed the production by probably months just to even get those, you know, the permissions to shoot outside. So there was some guerrilla filming going on there, you know.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Mike, for coming all this
Thank
way.
you.
It's been a super pleasure getting to know you. And are you going to be sticking around for the rest of the day?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, we're leaving tomorrow, so
Okay.
we're here.
Great,
you know.
great. Because we do have, after a feature film, we have a dinner break, but then
Oh, cool.
we are going to have our meet and greet for those of you
Oh,
out
cool.
there at 8 o'clock tonight, and you get to meet these wonderful filmmakers out on the orange carpet. So let's give it up for Mike, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.